Hello and welcome to Scripps News. I'm Alexa Liacca. We have breaking news this afternoon. President Joe Biden is ending his 2024 bid for the White House. This all started after that disastrous debate performance. Doubts only grew that he was fit to serve for 4 more years. He just released a letter minutes ago saying this. I want to read it to you. My fellow Americans, over the past 3.5 years, we have made great progress as a nation. Today, America has the strongest economy in the world. We've made historic investments in rebuilding our nation, in lowering prescription drug costs for seniors, and in expanding affordable health care to a record number of Americans. We've provided critically needed care to 1 million veterans exposed to toxic substances, passed the first gun safety law in 30 years, appointed the first African-American woman to the Supreme Court, and passed the most significant climate legislation in the history of the world. America has never been better positioned to lead than we are today. I know none of this could have been done without you, the American people. Together, we overcame a once-in-a-century pandemic and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. We've protected and preserved our democracy, and we've revitalized and strengthened our alliances around the world. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it may have been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. I will speak to the nation later this week in more detail about my decision. For now, let me express my deepest gratitude to all those who have worked so hard to see me reelected. I want to thank Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner in all this work. And let me express my heartfelt appreciation to the American people for the faith and trust you have placed in me. I believe today what I always have, that there is nothing America can't do when we do it together. We just have to remember we are the United States of America. Again, breaking news, a letter released from President Joe Biden in just the last few minutes. He is stepping out of the 2024 race. I want to bring in Chris Whipple to talk all about this. Chris, you are very familiar with the Biden family. You corresponded with Biden, writing a book about him. What's your take on what just happened?
Well, absolutely extraordinary moment, and it's been the wildest political drama of my lifetime. A drama that no screenwriter could have dreamed up, and it's about to get, I think, even more interesting. But I'm thinking about Joe Biden right now and how difficult this decision had to be for him. I mean, this is a guy who has time after time after time defied the experts and what he would probably call the elites when they counted him out. He was counted out after the Iowa caucus in 2020. He was declared dead and buried after the New Hampshire primary when he lost badly there, only to recover and surprise everyone in South Carolina, go on to the nomination and a big victory in 2020. So I'm really feeling I'm surprised that he did this quite so quickly. I thought it would take him more time, but I think he deserves enormous credit because he and his inner circle, I am sure, thought they could win this race. But the pressures became unbearable and untenable, and I think he's graciously made the right decision at this point, but it could not have been easy.
And what do you think was the straw that broke the camel's back here? I mean, we saw over the last several weeks the pile of congressional Democrats that said, I think it's time to pass the torch. But we also saw recent polling come out from voters, in the last week or so that more than the majority of voters surveyed thought Biden should step aside. Was it the polls from voters, or was it this pile of Washington legislators that did this? What do you think was maybe the final thing that made him choose this path?
I don't think the polls had anything to do with it. I would bet you that Joe Biden, in his heart of hearts, and even some of his inner circle, believe that Joe Biden could still win this race, if not for this enormous rebellion among the entire Democratic Party establishment, obviously led by Nancy Pelosi, but including a lot of his former allies who I'm sure it was painful, but I think he realized that he could not win this race with a continuing hemorrhage of support among Congress and the party establishment.
Something notable that I took from this letter upon reading it was that there was a thanks and appreciation for Kamala Harris, but not this is who you should proceed with. What did you make of that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And just the fact that he made this announcement in the form of a statement rather than an Oval Office address, for example, which frankly is the way I thought he would have gone with such a momentous announcement. So I think it is notable and interesting that he doesn't anoint Kamala Harris. I think that as a realistic, just the reality is that the only plan B for the Democrats is Kamala Harris. I don't think you can deny the nomination to the first black vice president in American history and then expect your most critical constituency, black voters, to turn out in November. So I think she's going to be the nominee. But look, we've seen it's been a wild 3-week period. And as I say, the dramas will continue.
And we've seen such fracture within the Democratic Party, which has often been a criticism of the GOP over the last several years, that there's so much party infighting, the Republicans can't get along. But this fracture that we've seen in the Democratic Party over the last several weeks has been really staggering. Will you talk a little bit about, who you see these Democrats rallying behind to move forward with? We heard Nancy Pelosi say she'd support an open nomination. We've heard a lot of people supporting Kamala Harris. I know you said she is the obvious choice, but do you see, because of all of this fracture that exists, that other names are going to pop up here?
Well, first, let me just say that I think sometimes unanimity and scripted conventions that go exactly as you write them are sometimes overrated. I thought that the Republicans had a smooth running convention, and then at the end, Donald Trump shot himself in the foot. I'm sorry, an unfortunate analogy here, but he certainly did himself no favors by then going off the deep end with a completely unhinged talk about Hannibal Lecter and other crazy things. So I think that unanimity can be overrated. I think there's real complacency in the GOP right now. And Donald Trump is still an enormously unpopular figure. I think the Democrats have a real chance now to unite behind Kamala Harris or another candidate, but I think likely Kamala Harris, and to really go at Donald Trump, a prosecutor against a convicted felon, a woman who wants to expand reproductive freedoms against a guy who wants to outlaw abortion, just for openers. That's the message.
Certainly going to be a very, very different narrative moving forward. Huge breaking announcement from the president today. Chris, I would love if you would stand by with us, because I want to go to our Scripps News correspondent, Maya Rodriguez, who is live with us now from Rehoboth Beach in Delaware, right where the president is now isolating with COVID. Maya, what's it like on the ground there?
Well, I have to tell you, we had left this spot for a few minutes. We went down the road from here, and in fact, we passed the area where President Biden has his vacation home. We know that because there are numerous Delaware State Police out there, as well as some other SUVs that seem to indicate the Secret Service is over in that area. But like you mentioned, just a tremendous, momentous moment here in Rehoboth Beach. This is a place where the Biden family has often come for comfort, to basically get away from Washington, D.C. and everything that happens inside the Beltway. But of course, this announcement coming from the president today, shaking all of that up. Just for the viewers who are joining us right now, I want to read to you a portion of the letter that President Biden sent out. In it, he said, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it has been my intention, the secret election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. I will speak to the nation later this week and have more details about my decision. Now, again, what that entails, what this means for Vice President Kamala Harris, what this means for the Democratic ticket as a whole, that is a big question at this point. I mean, we have never been necessarily in this particular type of situation where a president is battling COVID and is now having to make this decision. Of course, this week he was supposed to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That meeting was supposed to take place tomorrow at the White House. There were all these questions we were asking earlier today about whether that meeting would actually happen, given how the president is doing health-wise at this point. But with this announcement, of course, that has upended the entire political spectrum, Alexa.
Certainly a lot of questions, Maya, as to, how this impacts the conversations with Netanyahu. But I mean, will you also just give us a quick update on Biden's health? Because he's still in the course of being treated for COVID with medications at this point, right?
And just before this announcement was made, we had gotten a notice, a letter that the White House doctor had sent out, basically updating the White House and in turn the American people about how the president was doing. And in that letter, the White House doctor said that the president had just completed his 8th dose of Paxlovid. And like we were talking about all morning long, the normal course of Paxlovid for somebody who has COVID would be 10 doses. That would be 2 doses a day for 5 days. So presumably tomorrow there would be 1 more course, 2 more courses, if you will, for that day for the president. But he did say that the president had improved. I mean, we know that he had this lingering cough, but that his lungs are clear. So that was the latest we had heard from the White House doctor. Again, a little more than an hour before the president put out this bombshell of a letter.
Scripps News correspondent Maya Rodriguez, thank you for that update live from Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, right near where President Biden is now staying. Thank you so much. I want to go back now to Chris Whipple, who is author of a book about Joe Biden, The Fight for His Life. Chris, we haven't seen a moment like this where someone has, a presidential nominee has stepped out of a race so close to the election ever, period, in our history. But the closest parallel, we're looking back to Lyndon Johnson, who in the midst of the Vietnam War announced in 1968 he wasn't going to seek re-election. But this seems so much different, to be 4 months out from people heading to the ballot box. Talk about this moment in history that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, it's really one of the most momentous days in American political history. And you're right to point to Lyndon Johnson. I'm thinking back to the evening of March 31st, 1968, when Lyndon Johnson shocked the world by announcing that he would not seek another term as president. The last time a president voluntarily stepped away from running for a second term. Now, in LBJ's case, he said he wanted to get rid of all political considerations and pursue peace in Vietnam, to see if he could get a peace settlement. He was unsuccessful in doing it, but he got a tremendous boost of public support when he made that announcement. And I would expect Joe Biden to get the same reaction. This was a really courageous step for him, and I think he deserves tremendous credit, and I think he'll get it. He certainly should, from Democrats who believe that he was one of the most consequential presidents in modern American history, but that it was time for him to pass the torch, and so he has done.
I mean, in his letter, he talked about the achievements, that America has never been in a better place, and listed off all of the legislative achievements that have come to pass during his term. And he said time after time, I can beat Donald Trump. I'm the only one who has. I'm not going anywhere. So this is just such a stark about face. Why, if you're listing off your accomplishments here and you feel that the country's never been better, why step out? I mean, it's hard to fathom the conflicting narratives here that have been messaged from him in the White House, and that's come from this letter. Where do you think the disconnect happened here?
Well, we're going to find out in the coming days and weeks, I'm sure, as some of his inner circle begin to talk about it. I suspect it was, in the end, a cold political calculation. Must have been clear that he just could not continue to campaign with the Democratic Party and particularly the establishment figures fractured. He knows, he's smart enough to know, and his inner circle is certainly smart enough to know that you can't win an election under those circumstances, and you can't wish it away. But I, again, bet in his heart of hearts that he thinks he thought he could beat Trump. He's bowed to the, the unfortunate political reality in his mind, I'm sure, that he can't do it realistically.
We are going to continue taking a look at this situation. Chris Whipple, we thank you so much for your time and insight, and we hope you'll stand by with us.